or how to use numerical equations to talk about buying and selling. Let us start with Ragnar Frisch. His Norwegian last name means fresh, new. That's a kind of premonition, I guess. He was born in Christiania, Norway, as the son of gold and silversmith Anton Frisch and Ragnar Fredrik Frisch, née Ketilsen. Now, Christiania is called Oslo. Supposedly, he was destined to continue his father's business. Ragnar stated, quote, "When I was planning my future, it was more or less taken for granted that I should follow the gold and silver tradition. For that purpose, I started as an apprentice in the workshop of the famous Oslo firm David Anderson, and at the end of the apprenticeship in 1920, I completed my handicraftsman probation work as a goldsmith." End of quote. It seemed to be his destiny, but interestingly, his mother had a strong feeling about the trade will not be satisfactory for me in the long run. Ragnar says, she insisted that at the same time as he completed his apprenticeship, he should take up an university study, then perused the catalogue of the Oslo University and found that economics was the shortest and easiest study. Shortest and easiest, yeah, sure. So therefore, economics it became, he wrote in his short autobiography at the Nobel webpage. It could have been shortest and easiest for him, but he made this university degree longest and hardest for the rest of the economists after him. I guess the world of economics and governments are in great debt with this fine lady, Ragnar Fredrik Ketilsen. She proved right. Ragnar coined the word econometrics for the first time in his article for the Norsk Matematisk Foreningsskrifter back in 1926. By the way, he wrote the article in French. He passed his university degree in economics in Oslo 1919. About a year later, he went abroad to study economics and mathematics in earnest. He visited France, Germany, Great Britain, the United States, and Italy. He passed his PhD on a mathematical statistical subject in the Oslo University in 1926. By the time of his first publication, there were few more than 151,000 people in his native city. His new tool will affect those people and the rest of the world. He stated econometrics is intermediate between mathematics, statistics, and political economics. This last field implies decision-making affecting a whole society. The use of econometrics affects all the people within a country. Realize that. Finally, he recognizes he tried to solve some problems and he failed to do so. Nevertheless, he received many honors bestowed upon him and he mixed his failures and his success by taking a humble position. In fact, he says, "When I think of the long list of problems of which I have in vain tried to find the solution and think of the honors that have nevertheless been bestowed upon me, I understand with deep thankfulness to whom all this is due. To the Lord, who has steered my steps over the years and who has been my refuge in the superior matters which no science can ever reach." He was not ashamed about his beliefs. I want to share two statements Ragnar produced, which seem to me very important to understand his work. Quote, "I have insisted that econometrics must have relevance to concrete realities, otherwise it degenerates into something which is not worthy of the name econometrics, but ought rather to be called plyometrics." End of quote. Quote, "Deep in the human nature, there is an almost irresistible tendency to concentrate physical and mental energy on attempts at solving problems that seem to be unsolvable. Indeed, for some kinds of active people, only the seemingly unsolvable problems can arouse their interest." End of quote. His partner in crime is Jan Tinbergen. He was born on 12 April 1903 in The Hague, Netherlands, as the son of Dirk Cornelis Tinbergen, a scholar of medieval Dutch, and Jeanette Nieuwen Eek. She was a primary teacher in Scheveningen. Both of them transmitted their love for teaching, reading, art, and helping other people. Their family was a medium-class one. Jan was the eldest of 5 children. His siblings were Nicolaas Tinbergen, who in 1973 won the Nobel Prize for Physiology, Youngest was Luc Tinbergen, who grew up to be a famous ornithologist and ecologist. Between them were a sister called Giacomienne and a brother named Dick. Apart from his old siblings, John also grew up with a number of other children raised by the Tinbergens in the same house. Most of them had their parents living in Dutch East Indies, but during the First World War they also had some Belgian and Austrian refugees living with them. It seems a very sure source for his interest in social well-being. John was a very good student since primary school. He earned a certificate as most excellent pupil. Later, he attended Hungary Buger School. His favorite subjects were the science and mathematics. Tell me about it. While he was studying at Hungary Buger School, the First World War erupted. The sad reality he witnessed influenced young Jan to a great extent and helped him to form his social and economic views early in his life, and started his personal position against war, that's for sure. In 1921, he entered the University of Leiden. There he was influenced by Paul Ehrenfest, who would teach through dialogues. Because of such practices, he was able to take part in discussions with Albert Einstein, Kamerlingh Onnes, Nobel Prize for Physics in 1913. Lorentz and Seaman were also present there, John related later in an interview. Times while studying at the university, he started accompanying the postman as he went on his rounds and was appalled by the poverty he saw. Through those years, Tinbergen realized that if he wanted to make significant contribution to the society, he needed to study economics. He was a conscientious objector for the military. He was assigned to an administrative position at the state prison of Rotterdam State, and then he was transferred to Central Bureau of Statistics in The Hague. In 1928, he returned to the University of Leiden for completing his doctoral degree. His dissertation, Minimum Problemen in the Natuurkunde and the Economy, combined his interest in physics, mathematics, and economics. Working under Paul Ehrenfest, he defended his thesis in 1929. So he really impacted the life of millions around the world. We will see how afterwards. He was very concerned about the peace and equality among humans and the use of econometrics to affect the society. For having developed and applied dynamic models for the analysis of economic processes. That's the reason for the prize. But what does it mean? Like Ragnar Frisch before him, Jan Tinbergen was a pioneer in changing economics from a science formulated in words to one based on mathematics. Ragnar Frisch, Jan Tinbergen, and Irving Fisher took, in 1930, the initiative in the creation of the Econometric Society. According to the Society's constitution, it is an international society for the advancement of economic theory in its relation to statistics and mathematics. We shall look at four fields in which Frisch made major contributions. 1. Utility theory, index numbers, and welfare economics. 2. Estimation of demand and supply functions and statistical confluence analysis. 3. Capital theory and dynamic economics. And 4. Depression and circulation planning. In 1926, Ragnar Frisch published Sur un problème d'économie pure, in a not very widely distributed publication issued by the Norwegian Mathematical Association at the University of Oslo, the only university in Norway at that time. It was not translated and published in English until 1972, at the very end of Frisch's life. The paper will deserve a place in the history of economics, even for no other reason than the opening sentences, which coined the first of Frisch's many and by far the most important contributions to the international terminology of the discipline. The Sur un problème essay made a forceful impression on the small number of mathematically inclined economists who, like Irving Fisher, happened to be introduced to it. The contribution of Frisch's 1926 paper was, however, more than the coinage of a new term. It was a powerful demonstration of the meaning of econometrics, mathematical precision in the formulation of theoretical concepts and relationships so as to make them quantifiable, and a reduction and ingenuity in the application of the statistical methods to available data. Frisch became an initiator of new approaches, always solidly backed by theoretical corroboration, often also with impressive numerical illustration, rather than someone to write up the final classical volume in any single field. From the mid-1920s, he pursued a number of fields more or less simultaneously: production theory, time series analysis, utility measurement, dynamic modeling, econometric methods, national accounts, et al. Typically, his main contributions are attempts at opening up new avenues and suggesting approaches hitherto untried. A special feature of Frisch's research interests was his knack for numerical calculations. Some of his papers were almost superhuman in terms of numerical calculations. For several years in the 1950s, Frisch kept in close touch with the designers of Swedish calculators and posed calculation problems for them to solve, usually optimization problems drawn from his planning model exercises. The interest in numerical analysis methods was carried over to computers. Frisch's model exercises were generally large and tended to stretch the limit with regard to data requirements and computer needs, with detailed representation of industries and social groups, sometimes with specification of large individual investment projects as well, and usually tied together by means of extended Leontief input-output matrices. Frisch's main contribution to statistics and econometric methods was not his time series analysis, but his contribution towards developing tools for determining the interrelations between stochastic variables, in particular his confluence analysis, which had developed from ideas Frisch had nurtured in the 1920s. While Frisch was at Yale in early 1928, he completed his correlation and scatter paper, which was subsequently published in 1929. Rather than proposing distinct new methods, correlation and scatter provided a more comprehensive framework for data analysis and for discussing and analyzing multiple regression methods. In a Frisch-like fashion, several new concepts were introduced, such as the scatter coefficient that gave name to the paper, but also the first use of multiple collinearity. In Statics and Dynamics paper, he introduced his definition of static and dynamic in economy theory. In this paper, Frisch formulated his celebrated definition of static and dynamic laws in economics. If the formulation of an economic relationship requires both a variable and its rate of change or lag value, it is a dynamic relationship. If not, it is a static. The Propagation and Impulse article in 1933 became Frisch's most celebrated article and the one for which he was awarded the Nobel Prize, although the article itself is not explicitly mentioned in the official announcement. Hence, Frisch's effort in microdynamics was ultimately rated higher than his contributions to utility measurement and econometric methods. The article has often been referred to as having caused a turning point in the understanding of the causes of cycles and the role of stochastic disturbances. It was also an important stepping stone in development towards a macroeconomic formulation of economic interrelations. Ragnar Frisch was appointed by the Council of Econometric Society as editor of its journal in 1932. The first issue appeared in January 1933, and Frisch remained as editor for a period of 22 years until 1955. There is no doubt that Frisch deserves more credit for this idea than anyone else. The name of the journal is in fact older than that of the society. Frisch has suggested Econometrica as a suitable name for a journal already in 1926. The importance of a good economic education program naturally figured prominently in Frisch's priorities. High-quality graduates in economics within government administration will be a sine qua non for implementing rational planning. The message was that econometrics was only for the chosen. Quote, "It should be stated explicitly that such an increase in the number of men devoted to econometrics is desirable only on the condition of quality. There are so many chances of abusing it, of doing more harm than good with it, that it should only be put in the hands of really first-rate men. Others should be absolutely discouraged from taking up econometrics." End of quote. In the 1950s and 1960s, Frisch got involved in planning for developing countries. He spent several months in India in 1954-55 and he established personal relations with Jawaharlal Nehru. His involvement with the United Arab Republic went much deeper. He spent extended periods there in 1957 until 1960. He also established links with Soviet planning. The main impact of Frisch's influence was perhaps that post-war planning and policy making in Norway became very oriented towards the use of large macroeconomic models, with the official models sharing important characteristics with Frisch's models. The more ambitious ideas in the Frischian planning scheme, example the specification of macroeconomic preference functions and mathematical programming, were not even attempted utilizing Norwegian planning. But India and the United Arab Republic became new fields for application. The UAR in particular offered a chance to conduct fairly larger-scale experiments in implementing his model ideas. Frisch brought several assistants with him to Cairo, and the UAR became a more important testing ground for his model than Norway. During the 1930s, Tinbergen developed the first macroeconomic model that described in detail variables from the entire economy and placed them in a mathematical relationship with one another. Previously, this could only be done in general terms, but now it could be done with concrete numbers. Tinbergen used his knowledge of statistics to test models in order to choose those that were most suitable. Along with Frisch and others, Tinbergen developed the fields of econometrics, the use of statistical tools to test economic hypotheses. It appears that on no less than 6 occasions has he brought economics a large step forward. Thus, 1. He was a pioneer in modern economic dynamics. 2. He helped to establish econometrics. 3. He is the founder of empirical macroeconomics. 4. He contributed decisively to create the modern techniques of economic forecasting and prediction. 5. He is the founder of the modern theory of economic policy. 6. He has contributed significantly to modern development planning in backward countries. Convenient to divide Tinbergen's activities and contributions to economics into 3 groups, which also happen to represent consecutive periods of his career. During each period, he made pioneering contributions to economics and exerted a profound and lasting influence within the field to which he devoted his attention and energy. During each period, he helped to set economics on a new track. His work paralleled to some extent that of Ragnar Frisch. They were always in close contact and influenced each other on several occasions. Frisch, Jan Tinbergen, and Irving Fisher took in 1930 the initiative in the creation of the Econometric Society. Its main objective should be to promote studies that aim at a unification of the theoretical quantitative approach and the empirical quantitative approach to economic problems, and that are penetrated by constructive and rigorous thinking similar to that which has come to dominate in the natural sciences. The Econometric Society became immediately a success. In addition to this organizational achievement, Tinbergen made some of the most fundamental early contributions to econometrics. Among them, I want in particular to stress the discovery of the so-called cobweb theorem and the related contributions to dynamic theory and the attempts of statistical testing of business cycle theories. In uncontrolled agricultural markets, it is usual to find that prices and quantities fluctuate in opposite directions. In a celebrated article in 1930, Tinbergen pointed out that this phenomenon could be explained on the assumption of fixed demand and supply curves, provided that supply production reacts to prices with a time lag of 1 year. This mechanism is now known as the cobweb theorem. Tinbergen himself applied this mathematical technique to the business cycle problem as early as 1931 in an article of the shipbuilding cycle. By the end of the 30s, it had become a standard method of dynamic analysis in economics. Professor Tinbergen's second great contribution to econometrics was his pioneering work on statistical testing of business cycle theories. It resulted in 2 volumes, A Method and Its Application to Investment Activity and Business Cycles in the United States of America, 1919 to 1932, both published in 1939 by the League of Nations, Geneva. It is the above-mentioned two volumes which stand out as the undisputed monument of early empirical macroeconomic model building and theory testing. It is no exaggeration to say that these two volumes opened up a completely new branch of economics, empirical macroeconomics. He produced a 27-equation econometric model of the Dutch economy. Tinbergen was the first economist who developed the first national comprehensive macroeconomic model back there in 1936 for his country. Later, he applied it to the United States and the United Kingdom. The aim of the 1936 model was partly to discover the dynamic properties of the Dutch economy and partly to construct a basis for economic policy decisions. As is stated in his biography, he labored in some non-academic offices. As a statistician for business cycle research in the Central Bureau of Statistics, as expert temporarily attached to the League of Nations Secretariat, and as director of Central Planning Bureau of the Netherlands government. Another of Tinbergen's major contributions was to show that a government with several economic targets for both the unemployment rate and the inflation rate, for example, must have at least as many policy instruments such as taxes and monetary policy. By the middle of the 50s, Professor Tinbergen shifted his field of interest more and more to the problems of economic cooperation and development. He was an advisor to governments of various developing countries and to international organizations. In simple words, the new science, econometrics, is the field of knowledge which is used by governments to determine some of the most important issues in a society: the interest rate, salaries, even taxes. Also is the part of economics used to calculate and analyze the business cycles and their performance in society. So now you can have a better perspective of its importance. The econometrics models have been used to have a better idea of how a society runs and should run its economic relations.